God, we just come before you now and thank you for a place to gather. Thank you for Mark and Bonnie for opening their home. Thank you for the freedom to meet as a small bunch of people. Just pray for those who couldn't make it today and pray for those who could. Just ask that you would give me a clarity in my mind and that I'd be able to say something that is helpful to people. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're in Daniel chapter 4. Steve kind of did a little bit of a kind of a summary of the first 4 chapters last week a little bit in his. Remember way back when Scott said that the theme of the book is in spite of present circumstances, God is in control. And we've seen that through the various situations. And there's going to be similarities in this chapter to some of the previous events. But this is one where Daniel and his friends are not necessarily in hot water as everybody else. So let's jump in. One more quick little thing. I've done this section. I kind of like this section, and partly that's why I was willing to do it. But it's going to be very different what I came up with now than what I came up with 10 years ago or 15 years ago or the last time that I did this. I can't remember how long it's been since I've done it, but it's been a while. And it's interesting how we change, or as we change, how things that we see come at us differently. And this was fairly different than what I'm used to. But let's jump in. We got some new players on the scene. We now have a new king after Nebuchadnezzar. His name is Belshazzar, and let's jump in. Verse 1 says, Belshazzar, the king, held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. When Belshazzar, gosh, I'm going to struggle with that all day.
Just can't be.
The king, the new king, tasted the wine. He gave orders to bring out the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God, which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. It's amazing how they repeat things over and over to make sure we kind of understand what's going on. So, remember back in chapter 1, Nebuchadnezzar kind of took the exiles and conquered Jerusalem, took the stuff from the temple, the vessels. Belshazzar decides, hey, I've got a great idea. This wine is so good. And we're having a party anyways, let's bring those out and let's use those. And it was not his best idea. But got a couple of things I want to hit on, just because I didn't really know this until I kind of studied this a little bit more. In verse 2 it says Nebuchadnezzar, his father. Probably not related. He's probably not related to Nebuchadnezzar. It's about 23 years after Nebuchadnezzar had died. Belshazzar's father, his name is Nabonidus. I don't know. Nabonidus. He was the 4th king. Nabonidus. Gosh, that's a hard name for me to pronounce. He was the 4th king after Nebuchadnezzar. there were a couple of quick people that turned over really quick, and then Nab, we'll call him Nab, he became the king. Belshazzar is his son. Now, Nab, as we're calling him, he was a devotee to the moon god. Sin was the god's name. And there was a very powerful priesthood, the Marduk priests, that were in Babylon. And they really didn't like the moon god. And so there was a big potential uprising going on there. And so what Nab decided to do is he decided to put his son in as co-regent and handle Babylon. He ended up going to a place called Tiema, which is actually in Saudi Arabia. And it kind of sounds like the scholars are kind of 50-50 saying whether he was kind of running away from the situation with the priests so they didn't clash and have a big issue. And then there was another group that said, well, this place in Tiema was a very important trade route, and so it may have been very valuable to have him over there instead. So there's multiple things going on. It's could be this, it could be this, it could be both. But okay, let me make sure I got all the really important stuff. So Belshazzar's arrogance sorry, I'm going to step back one more time. It was kind of well known that the Medes had been attacking. They were, as one person puts it, they were on the doorstep. They were outside the city, and the city was protected. They thought they were totally fine. So it's curious whether this feast, they thought of three different options. Different scholars have thought of three different reasons why there would be a feast. The first one would be that Belshazzar was so overconfident that, hey, we're Babylon, you know what I mean, we're the empire, no one's going to mess with us. It could be that it was, let's have a party to show that I'm not really concerned at all. And the last option that these guys threw out was that, hey, we're going to be dead before long anyways, let's go out with a party. So it's probably one of those three things. Regardless, there's an arrogance to Belshazzar, and kind of just a lack of humility. And he gets appointed as a co-regent. They're calling him king by his dad, to help his dad get out of the situation and or let him handle other things. And he kind of has, he's out of his depth. He has no, it's just that his dad's the king. It's not like he's done anything to warrant this position. And as we go through the chapter, you kind of see, you see an immaturity, you see an arrogance, a lack of humility, and just kind of not getting it. So what it really made me think of is the idea of privilege. Is that he's in a position that he doesn't deserve. And it's not by anything he did. It's just who his dad was. And I think I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks now, because I kind of had an idea of what I was going to try and deal with on this, but it's easy for us to forget how lucky we are, how fortunate we are. For me, as a heteronormative white male in the U.S., I kind of hit the lottery when I was born, being in this place. There are certain advantages that I have as a white male in our society that I don't deserve, I didn't do anything to get, but because of the way our society is framed, there are advantages. I could have been born anywhere else 1,000 years ago, and my life would be obviously completely different. I could have been, there could have been so many different things that would have greatly altered the circumstances I needed to face in my life. And I think having a wife that is studying sociology and making me think about tough things, it's just not right sometimes. Because, like Scott Bourne always says, I prefer to be shallow and not have to deal with tough issues. And I've had to kind of think through that whole idea of how many things I have been given or don't even consider because I'm who I am. And whether it be racial injustice or gender injustice or the whole LGBTQ injustices, there's so many things that as who I am, I kind of got a pass on a lot of things. And I think we sometimes don't appreciate that to the full degree that we should. So I'll try to jump off the soapbox for a minute and keep going. So we'll go into verse 5. So we're Daniel 5, verse 5. Suddenly, the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster in the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand, so all they see is a hand, back of a hand, that did the writing. And then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him. And his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. Got his attention, I think. Verse 7, the king called aloud to bring the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, any man who could read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as third ruler of the kingdom. Then all of the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. The queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the king and his nobles. The queen said, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom in whom a spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. So Daniel
now was summoned, or let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation. Gosh, that's a lot of reading, sorry. But it kind of goes as all one section. So basically what's happening, out of nowhere, just a hand starts writing on the wall. Enough to kind of make you a little alarmed. A little bit more alarmed is no one can figure out what it means. You get the smartest people in the kingdom, they don't know. The interesting thing is Daniel's not considered in that group anymore. Now, Daniel is probably in his 80s. It could be that, or it could be based on some of the language and some of the different things, is that Belshazzar looked back at Nebuchadnezzar as an old relic, whereas someone, because everybody was, Nebuchadnezzar was the man. He was it. He was the most powerful king they'd ever had. And it would probably get old to get that thrown at you all the time. And he probably, it kind of appears in the language and the way, as we go through the chapter, there's just some nuance in the language that he's kind of saying, I'm not Nebuchadnezzar's biggest fan. Let's put it there. So in verse 6, King's kind of freaking out, growing pale, his knees are knocking together, hip joints go slack, he's melting, basically, essentially. Then in verse 9, after the wise men, nobody can figure out what's going on, he grows even paler. He's like, oh my goodness, this is not good. And it's not. Well, the interesting thing is right away, before anybody can interpret it, he says, if you guys can do this, third in the kingdom behind Nab, his dad, and him. Instantly get put to the next person in line. Clothed in purple, essentially royalty. I will make you royalty if you could just tell me what the heck this means. So, this is such a long section, so I might stop a few different times rather than read the whole section. But let's jump into the next section. Verse 13. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, are you Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? Now I have heard that you have a spirit of the gods in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you. Just now the wise men and the conjurers were brought in before me, and that they might read the inscription and might make known its interpretation to me. But they could not declare the interpretation of the message. But I personally have heard about you, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now if you are able to read the inscriptions and make the interpretation known to me, you will be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you have authority as the third ruler of the kingdom. So, the interesting thing is that the way things work, probably there, he would have probably heard of Daniel before this. There would have been enough stories going on that he probably would have heard of this, and that's partly why it leads me to believe of a little bit of disdain maybe for Nebuchadnezzar and that regime. Just my personal opinion, it doesn't mean much. The other thing, and someone brought this up when I was reading through it, is that he goes out of his way to make sure he tells Daniel that he knows that he's an exile, he's a prisoner. I'm the king. And I've heard good things about you, but these guys couldn't do it. So there's some things kind of going on that's interesting. Verse 17. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known to him. Keep your gifts. I don't want it. but I'll do it anyways. Verse 18. O King, the Most High God granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. Because of the grandeur which he bestowed upon him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished to kill, he killed, and whomever he wished spare alive, he spared alive, sorry. And whomever he wished he elevated, and whomever he wished he humbled. But when his heart was filled, when his heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was disposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. He was also driven away from mankind. This is what we learn in chapter 4. Driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of the beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. Yet you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. For you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and you have brought the vessels of his house before you, and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines, having been drinking wine from them. And you have praised the God of silver and gold, and of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, hear, or understand. But the God in whose hand your life breath, and all of your ways you have not glorified. Then the hand was sent from him, and this inscription was written out. So at first Daniel's saying, Nebuchadnezzar, he was a king. He was a real king. He got so arrogant, though, that he had to be put in his place. You knew this story, Belshazzar, and you didn't learn from his mistake. Now, as we learned earlier, Nebuchadnezzar sometimes had a hard time learning this lesson too. He had to learn the hard way. He had to go through things multiple times. So the question I always ask myself in a situation like that is, am I able to learn from other people's mistakes, or do I have to learn the hard way? Sometimes I have to learn the hard way. There's some lessons, though, that I've learned by watching other people and saying, I don't think I want to be that. I don't think that's for me. I see that path, and that's not the path I want to go. But a lot of us will say that we're the exception. That, yeah, this happened to this person, but I'm smarter, I'm this, I'm that. I can get around it. I can work through this. I can overcome whatever. Whether it be issues with dependency, whether it be issues with relationships, whether it be work situation, whatever. Sometimes we see people that go through something, and then we'll go through almost the exact same thing, because we didn't take note of things. Let me see if there's any other brilliance. I'm depriving you guys of. So, if you read through the tone of it, Daniel is, and I don't know if he's just a crotchety old guy in his 80s, or if he's just like, you arrogant little prick. You don't even stand in Nebuchadnezzar's shadow, and yet you're this arrogant buffoon that's having a party while the Medes are outside. He's almost put off by him, almost disgusted by him, and
kind of makes it fairly well known. Okay. And he does, like I said, he points out that you knew all this. You've heard all these stories. And you followed the same, you fell into the same trap of arrogance and thinking you know better. He says, but instead, you've challenged God. And kind of in an in-your-face kind of way, saying, not only am I not going to learn the thing, but let's get the temple vessels and praise the gods, all these other gods in the midst of this. And I don't think God was all that happy with that. So Daniel's like, so we've got bad news and we've got worse news. Verse 25. Now this is the inscription that was written, many, many tekel upharsin. This is the interpretation of the message. It literally, there's multiple ways to interpret those particular words, the way it's done. The way most people say that it's intended is the idea of numbered, weighed, divided. And then he'll explain it. So verse 26, this is the interpretation of the message. Many, God has numbered your kingdom and put it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Perez, which is the singular of upharsin, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. Wow, that's probably not what he wanted to hear. That's really bad. Let's see how he reacts. Verse 29. Then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple, and put a necklace of gold around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him, that he now had authority as third ruler in the kingdom. He didn't get it at all. He's like, no worries. Okay, as I said, you're third in the kingdom. Let's have a party for Daniel. Hallelujah, everybody's great. Let's go on to verse 30. That same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. So I'm not sure if Belshazzar, he obviously didn't get it. I don't know if he's just keeping up appearances by putting the robe on Daniel and saying, okay, I'm going to keep my word and yada yada. But he just didn't get it. And as we talked about, the theme of this is that God is in control in spite of our circumstances. We're going to see that even through the regime change, God is still in control. God is still looking after his people. And it's actually going to be a good thing for his people down the road. Because it's either Darius or Cyrus, who is the Persian part of the Medes and Persian. He's that leader. I believe he's the one that sends them back to rebuild the temple. Okay. So a lot going on. And I've been probably longer than I should, so let me just wrap up. So the big idea is the things that I'd like for you guys to think about the most, which are not fun. Is that there was this idea, he was king and so he deserved this to some degree also, but he thought he was the most important person in the room and that everybody else is secondary. And to some degree that was true, but he did it with an arrogance that was out of line. And I think it's easy for us sometimes to be in a room
And hopefully we're not the person thinking this way, but thinking that they're the smartest or the best or the most powerful person in the world. None of that stuff matters. 2, privilege. Do we understand how lucky we are? Do we understand how many advantages we have that we have done nothing to earn? And does that help us? Does that make us arrogant? Or does that make us see those that don't have those advantages and want to pull them up? Because those are the two reactions. You either react from privilege with arrogance, as Belshazzar did, or you act in a way that says, let's level the playing field. Let's make things more equal. What kind of person are you going to be? Third, how often do you have to learn the hard way instead of from someone else's mistake? We see so many people do so many stupid things. Whether it be things they post on Facebook, whether things they do on the freeway, whether things they do at work or wherever, the grocery store. And we have choices and we can learn from other people's arrogance or stupidity or mistake. Or we could think that we know better and we've got this covered and I'll just go about things my way. And be oblivious to making the same mistakes that we see people around us make. Let's pray and we'll call it a wrap. God, thank you. Thank you for your word. Thank you that you desire to show us things that we don't know, that we need to know, and that can help us be valuable members of your kingdom. Pray for those that couldn't make it, that you would be with them, that you would strengthen them, that you would just look after us this week, that you would look after all the firefighters and everybody that's chasing all of the fires all throughout California. Ask that you would give them the strength that they need and the wisdom of how to deal with things. Keep people safe and structures safe as much as possible. And just ask that you would be with us this week and that you would help us to think about you. In Jesus' name, amen.